Okay, Nicolas Flamel. It's a little blurry. That's really blurry. There it goes. Oh, there it goes. Chapter 13. Nicolas Flamel. Dumbledore had convinced Harry not to go looking for the Mirror of Ezra again. And for the rest of Christmas holiday, the invisibility cloak stayed folded in the bottom of his trunk. Harry wished he could forget what he'd seen in that mirror as easily, but he couldn't. He started having nightmares over and over again and dreamed about his parents disappearing in a flash of green light while a high voice cackled with laughter. You see, Dumbledore was right. That mirror could drive you mad, said Ron when Harry told him about the dreams. Hermione, who had come back the day before term started, took a different view of things. She was torn between the horror of the idea of Harry being out of bed, roaming the school 3 nights in a row, if Filch would have caught you, and disappointment that he hadn't at least found out who Nicolas Flamel was. They had almost given up hope of ever finding who Flamel was in a library book, even though Harry was still sure he had read his name somewhere. Once term had started, they were back to skinning through the books for 10 minutes during breaks. Harry even less time now than the other two because Quidditch practice had started again. Wood was working the team harder than ever now. Even the endless rain that replaced the snow couldn't dampen his spirits. The Weasleys complained that Wood was becoming a fanatic, but Harry was on Wood's side. If they were going to win the next match against Hufflepuff, they would overtake Slytherin in the house championship for the first time in 7 years. Quite apart from wanting to win, Harry found that he had fewer nightmares when he was tired after training. Then, during one particular wet, muddy practice session, Wood gave the team a bit of bad news. He'd just gotten very angry with the Weasleys, who kept dive-bombing each other and pretending to fall off their brooms. Will you stop messing around? He yelled. That's exactly the sort of thing that will lose us the match. Snape's refereeing this time, and he'll be looking for any cause to knock points off Gryffindor. George Weasley really did fall off his broom at these words. Snape's refereeing? He spluttered through his mouthful of mud. When's he ever refereed a Quidditch match? He's not going to be fair. We might have to, if we might overtake Slytherin. The rest of the team landed next to George to complain too. It's not my fault, said Wood. We've just got to make sure we play clean game, so Snape hasn't got any excuse to pick on any of us. Which was all very well, thought Harry, but he had another reason for not wanting Snape near the wherein he was playing Quidditch. The rest of the team hung back to talk another as usual at the end of the practice, but Harry, he headed straight back to Gryffindor common room, where he found Ron and Hermione playing chess. Chess was the only thing Hermione ever lost at, something Harry and Ron thought was very good for her. Don't talk to me for a moment, she said, said Ron when Harry sat down next to him. I need to He caught sight of Harry's face. What's the matter with you? You look terrible. Speaking quietly so that no one would hear, Harry told the two about Snape's sudden sinister desire to be a Quidditch referee. Don't play, said Hermione at once. Say you're ill, said Ron. Pretend to break your leg, Hermione suggested. Really? Break your leg? Said Ron. I can't, said Harry. There isn't a reserve seeker. If I back out, Gryffindor can't play at all. At that moment, Neville toppled into the common room. How he had managed to climb through the portrait hole was anyone's guess, because his legs had been stuck together with what they recognized at once was a leg locker curse. He must have had to bunny hop all the way from Gryffindor Tower. Everyone fell over laughing except Hermione, who leapt up, performed the counter curse. Neville's legs sprang apart, and he got up to his feet, trembling. What happened? Said Hermione. Leaning over him with Harry and Ron. Malfoy! Neville said shakily. "I met him outside the library, and he said he'd been looking for someone to practice that on." "Go to Professor McGonagall," Hermione urged Neville. "Report him!" Neville shook his head. "I don't want any more trouble," he mumbled. "You've got to stand up to him, Neville," said Ron. "He's used to walking all over people. But that's no reason to lie down in front of him and make it easier." "There's no need to tell me I'm not brave enough to be a Gryffindor. Malfoy's already done that," Neville choked out. Harry felt in his pocket and his robes pulled out the chocolate frog, the very last one from the box Hermione had given him for Christmas. He gave it to Neville, who looked as though he might cry. "You're worth 12, Malfoy," Harry said. "The Sorting Hat chose you for Gryffindor, didn't it? And where's Malfoy? In stinking Slytherin." Neville's lip twitched in a weak smile, and he unwrapped the frog. "Thanks, Harry. I think I'll go to bed. Do you want the card? You collect them, don't you?" Neville walked away. Harry looked at the famous wizard card. "Dumbledore again?" he said. "He was the first one I ever—" He gasped. He stared at the back of the card, and then he looked up at Ron and Hermione. "I've found him," he whispered. "I found Flamel. I told you I'd read it somewhere before. I read it on the train coming here. Listen to this. Dumbledore is particularly famous for his defeat against the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945 for the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood and his work of alchemy with his partner, Nicolas Flamel." Hermione jumped to her feet. She hadn't looked so excited since they'd gotten back the marks from their first piece of homework. "Stay there," she said. She sprinted up to the stairs to the girls' dormitory. Harry and Ron barely had time to exchange mystified looks before she was dashing around with the enormous old book in her arms. "I've never thought to look in here," she whispered excitedly. "Oh, I got this out of the library weeks ago for a bit of light reading." "Light?" said Ron, but Hermione told him to be quiet until she'd looked something up, and she started flicking frantically through the pages, muttering to herself, "Ah, at last. That's what she was looking for. I knew it! I knew it!" "Aren't we allowed to speak? Are we allowed to speak yet?" said Ron grumpily. Hermione ignored him. "Nicholas Flamel," she whispered dramatically, "is the only known maker of the Sorcerer's Stone." This didn't have quite the effect she expected. "The what?" said Harry and Ron. "Oh, honestly. Do you two read? Look, read that. There." She pointed and looked towards them. Harry and Ron read it. "The ancient study of alchemy is concerned with the making of the Sorcerer's Stone, a legendary substance. With its astonishing powers, the stone will transform any metal into pure gold. It also produces the elixir of life, which will make the drinker immortal. There have been many reports of the Sorcerer's Stone over the centuries, but the only stone currently in existence belongs to Mr. Nicolas Flamel, and the alchemist and the opera lover, Mr. Flamel, who celebrated his 665th birthday last year, enjoys a quiet life in Devon with his wife, Pernell, 658. "See?" said Hermione when Harry and Ron had finished. "The dog! The dog must be guarding Flamel's secret Sorcerer's Stone. I bet he asked Dumbledore to keep it safe for him because his friends, and they knew someone was after it. That's why he wanted the stone removed out of Gringotts." "A stone that makes gold and stops you from ever dying?" said Harry. "No wonder Snape's after it. Anyone would want it." "And no wonder we couldn't find Flamel in the study of recent development of wizardry," said Ron. He's not exactly recent, if he's 665, now is he?" The next morning, the Defense of Dark Arts, while copying down different ways of treating werewolf bites, Harry and Ron were still discussing what they'd do with the Sorcerer's Stone if they had one. It wasn't until Ron said he would buy his own Quidditch team that Harry remembered about Snape in the coming match. "I'm going to play," he told Ron and Hermione. "If I don't, all the Slytherins will think I'm just too scared to face Snape. I'll show them. It'll really wipe their smiles off their faces if we win." "Just as long as we're not wiping you off the field," said Hermione. As the match drew near, however, Harry became more and more nervous. Whenever Ron and Hermione and the rest of the team wasn't too calm, the idea of overtaking Slytherin in the House Championship was wonderful. No one had done it in 7 years, but would they be allowed to do it with such a biased referee? Harry didn't know whether he was imagining it or not, but he seemed to keep running into Snape wherever he went. At times he even wondered whether Snape was following him, trying to catch him on his own. Potions lessons were turning into sort of weekly torture. Snape was so horrible to Harry. Could Snape possibly know they found out about the Sorcerer's Stone? Harry didn't see how he could, yet sometimes he had a horrible feeling that Snape could read his mind. Harry knew that they wished him good luck outside the locker rooms, and the next afternoon, then Ron and Hermione were wondering whether they'd ever see him alive again. It wasn't what you'd call comforting. Harry could hardly heard a word of what was pep talk. He pulled out the Quidditch robes, picked up his Nimbus 2000. Ron and Hermione, meanwhile, had found a place in the stands next to Neville, who couldn't understand why they looked so grim and worried, or why they had both brought their wands to the match. Little did Harry know that Ron and Hermione had been secretly practicing Leglocker Curse. They'd gotten the idea from Malfoy, using it on Neville, and they were ready to use it on Snape if he showed any sign of wanting to hurt Harry. Now, don't forget it. Locomotor mortis, Hermione muttered, as Ron slipped his wand under his sleeve. I know, Ron snapped. Don't nag. Back in the locker room, Wood had taken Harry aside. I don't want to pressure you, Potter, but if we ever needed an early capture of a snitch, it's now. Finish this game before Snape can favor Hufflepuff too much. The whole school's out there, said Fred Weasley, peering out of the door. Even blimey Dumbledore's watching. Harry Hart did a somersault. Dumbledore? He said, dashing to the door to make sure. Fred was right. There was no mistaking that Silverbeard. Harry could have laughed out loud with relief. He was safe. There was simply no way Snape would dare to try to hurt him if Dumbledore was watching. Perhaps that is why Snape was looking so angry as the teams marched onto the field, something that Ron noticed too. I've never seen Snape look so mean, he told Hermione. Look, they're off. Ouch! Someone had poked Ron in the back of the head. It was Malfoy. Oh, sorry, Weasley. Didn't see you there. Malfoy grinned broadly, and Crabbe and Goyle. Wonder how long Potter's going to stay on his broom this time. Anyone want to bet? What about you, Weasley? Ron didn't answer. Snape just awarded Hufflepuff a penalty because George Weasley had hit a bludger at him. Hermione, who had all her fingers crossed in her lap, was squinting fixedly at Harry, who was now circling the game like a hawk, looking for the snitch. You know how I think they chose people for the Gryffindor team? Said Malfoy loudly, a few minutes later, as Snape awarded Hufflepuff another penalty for no reason at all. It's people feel sorry. You see, there's Potter, who has got no parents, and there's the Weasleys, who've got no money. You should be on the team, Longbottom. You've got no brains. Neville went bright red and turned his seat to face Malfoy. I'm worth 12 of you, Malfoy, he stammered. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle howled with laughter, but Ron still not daring to take his eyes off the game. You tell him, Neville. Longbottom, if brains were gold, you'd be poorer than Weasley, and that's saying something. Ron's nerves were already stretched to the breaking point with the anxiety about Harry. I'm warning you, Malfoy. One more word and Ron, Hermione said. Harry! What? Where? Harry was suddenly gone. Spectacular dive. Drew gasped from the cheers of the crowd. Hermione stood up, her crossed fingers in her mouth as Harry streaked towards the ground like a bullet. You're in luck, Weasley. Potter's obviously spotted some money on the ground, said Malfoy. Ron snapped before Malfoy knew what was happening. Ron was on top of him, wrestling him to the ground. Neville hesitated and then clambered over the rocks to help. Come on, Harry! Hermione screamed, leaping onto her seat to watch Harry speed straight at Snape. She didn't notice Malfoy and Ron rolling around under the seat, nor the scuffles and yelps coming from the whirl of the fists with thus Neville and Crabbe and Goyle. Up in the air, Snape turned on his broomstick just in time to see something scarlet shoot past him, missing him by inches. The next second, Harry pulled out of the dive, his arm raised in triumph, the snitch clasped in his hand. The stands erupted. It had been a record. No one ever remembered the snitch being caught so quickly. Ron! Ron! Where are you? The game's over. Harry won. We've won. Gryffindor's in the lead, shrieked Hermione, dancing up and down the seat, hugging Parvati Patil in the row in front. Harry jumped off his broom a foot from the ground. He couldn't believe it. He'd done it. The game was over, and it had barely lasted 5 minutes. As Gryffindors came spilling onto the field, he saw Snape land nearly white-faced and tight-lipped. Then Harry felt a hand on his shoulder, and he looked up in Dumbledore's smiling face. "Well done," said Dumbledore quietly, so that only Harry could hear. "Nice to see you haven't been brooding about that mirror. Been keeping busy. Excellent." Snape spat bitterly to the ground. Harry left the locker room alone sometimes later to take his Nimbus 2000 back to the broom shed. He couldn't ever remember feeling happier. He'd done something to be proud of now, and he could always say that he was just famous name for, anymore. The evening air had smelled so sweet he walked over the damp grass, reliving the hour in his head, which was a happy blur. Gryffindors running to lift him in the shoulders, Ron and Hermione in the distance jumping up and down, and Ron cheering through his heavy nosebleed. Harry had reached the shed. He leaned against the wooden door and looked up at Hogwarts, and with the windows glowing in the setting, Gryffindor in the lead. He'd done it. He'd shown Snape. Speaking of Snape, a hooded figure came swiftly down the front steps of the castle. Clearly not wanting to be seen, it walked as fast as possible towards the forbidden forest. Harry's victory faded from his mind as he watched and recognized the figure's prowling walk. Snape sneaking into the forest while everyone else was at dinner. What was going on? Harry jumped back on his Nimbus 2000, took off, gliding silently over the castle. He saw Snape enter the forest at a run, and he followed. The trees were so thick he couldn't see where Snape had gone. He flew in circles, lower and lower, brushing the top of the branches of trees until he heard voices. He glided towards them and landed noiselessly in the towering beech tree. He climbed carefully along the branches, holding tight to his broomstick, trying to see through the leaves. Below the shallowy clearing stood Snape, but he wasn't alone. Quirrell was there too. Harry could make out the look on his face, but he was stuttering worse than ever. Harry strained to catch what they were saying. Do you know why you wanted to me here of all places, service? Oh, I thought we'd keep this private, said Snape. His voice was icy. Students aren't supposed to know about the Sorcerer's Stone, after all. Harry leaned forward. Quirrell was mumbling something. Snape interrupted him. Have you found out how to get past the beast of Hagrid's yet? But, Service, You don't mean me as an enemy, Quirrell, said Snape, taking a step backward. I don't know, no, what you know perfectly well what I mean. An owl hooted loudly, and Harry nearly fell out of the tree. He steadied himself in time to hear Snape say, Your little bit of hocus pocus, I'm waiting. But I don't. Very well, Snape cut in. We'll have another little chat soon, when you've had time to think things over, decided where your loyalties lie. He threw the cloak over his head and strode out of the clearing. It was almost dark now, but Harry could see Quirrell standing quite still, as though he was petrified. Harry, where have you been? Hermione squealed. We won! You won! We won! Shouted Ron, thumping Harry on the back. And I gave Malfoy a black eye, and Neville tried to take Crabbe and Goyle on single-handedly. He's still out cold, but Madame Pomfrey says he'll be all right. Talk about showing Slytherin! Everyone's waiting for you in the common room. We're having a party. Fred and George stole some cakes and stuff from the kitchens. Never mind that now, said Harry breathlessly. Let's find an empty room. You wait till I tell you hear this. He made sure Peeves wasn't inside before shutting the door behind them, and he told them what he had seen and heard. So you were right, the Sorcerer's Stone, and Snape's trying to force Quirrell to help him get it. He asked if he knew how to get past Fluffy, and he said something about Quirrell's hocus pocus. I reckon there were other things got in the stone apart from Fluffy. Loads of enchantments, probably, and Quirrell would have done them, since the anti-dark spells and that Snape needs to break through. So you mean that stone's only safe as long as Quirrell stands up to Snape? Said Hermione in alarm. It'll be gone by next Tuesday, said Ron.